Hello, welcome to the world of Word.
Coming up, another word in your attic.
And if you enjoy this, visit our Patreon to find out more about our exclusives and our general work of national importance.
The link is in the notes below. And now, on with the show.
Word in your attic, a Zoom with a view.
We're joined all the way from Japan by Morgan Fisher. Good evening, Morgan. It's evening with you.
Good to see you.
Evening. It is 6 o'clock in the evening, konbanwa, as they say.
You look very mod in that, very mid-60s. It's good.
Well, actually a friend here who's a huge fan of The Who, here we are, gave me this as a present. So I'll take it off now.
It works, very patriotic.
It's not bad, is it? Yeah.
And you lived in Japan since what, mid-80s, isn't it?
85, yeah.
Yeah. How was lockdown in Japan?
They're not as stringent as other places. And I think it's working very well. We still haven't had 1,000 fatalities in the whole country, which is twice the population of England. So, you know, I'm being very careful because I'm in that upper age limit, high risk group, you know. So basically I'm home alone.
Yeah.
And that's all right.
And have you had a chance to dig out a few odds and ends from the Tokyo attic?
I have. I mean, mostly records. And it's, you know, what we're doing here is a sort of sprint, isn't it? Because we're going to cram 52 years into about 20 minutes, right?
It can be done.
Can be done.
Your starter for 10. You
Let's
know?
get
Let's
going.
go.
Yeah.
And they're off.
All right. Well, my first band just modestly had a #1. I mean, why mess about?
Yes.
And this is my first band's first album, Love Affair.
Yeah, cool.
Everlasting Love Affair. In fact, here's the single in question. Hang on, let me get to the camera.
Right.
Oh, yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
Right. It is.
Which was written by 2 country musicians from Nashville. Not many people know that.
Because it was a hit for Robert Knight, wasn't it? The States was that? Is that?
Exactly, he was the first one. A very good soul version. But these composers, they're country musicians, and they've probably built about 6 ranches on the strength of this one.
I'm sure.
Sure they did, rightly so.
You were still at school when that went to #1. Is that right?
Well, it was, because it's actually started in '66, so actually going back 54 years. And we started out with a band called the Soul Survivors, which I'm sure, as you know, is the name of an American band.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you had to change your name, didn't you?
Expressway to Your Heart. So we got a strongly worded letter from them once we got a deal, and they said, you can't use that name. So we're looking for a name, and in the BBC, in the top Radio Times or whatever, BBC Times, there was a romantic, series called The Love Affair.
Oh, right.
And we thought, that's a good name, we'll do that. So we did it. And so, yeah, I was at school, I was 17. The band did 1 record, which wasn't a hit, actually. And then my mother and father, who were both teachers, said, well, it's all very well for you to do music, but you've got to have something to fall back on.
Quite right.
That dreadful phrase. And I've never
We all heard it.
I've never fallen back yet, and I don't intend to. But so they said, you know, just finish your A-levels, and then you can get back to music. And I was, oh, all right. So I left the band, and I didn't know if I'd ever get back with them. And about 3 months later, a #1, wasn't it? Talk about sick.
And then you wrote to them, didn't you, and said, can I rejoin? And they said yes, as simple as that.
It was amazing. It's one of the first of many miracles. I mean, I wrote to them. In fact, I got a friend to write to them. I was that shy, saying, you know, he's out of school now. He's available. Just thought I'd let you know. And back came a letter saying, yeah, we'd like to have you back.
And so you were launched into tours in front of screaming fans, were you? Straight away.
It was like Beatlemania. It really was. You couldn't hear what you were playing.
Right.
I mean, extraordinary. And you get out the gig, and there's no security in those days.
No.
You have to fight your own way to your car or your van through literally hundreds of screaming girls.
Screaming, what a miserable life for an 18-year-old. Yeah.
Well, we took a few of them with us on the way, so yeah, we made it fun. Yeah.
So what happened after Love Affair?
Well, you know, there was this phrase in those days about bands going heavy. And quite a few bands did that. They had a pop hit, And then they started to look at other bands who were starting up who were a bit more cool, like Spooky Tooth and Pink Floyd. Oh, I fancy doing some of that. Right. So we went through this going heavy phase. We even changed the name of the band to L.A.
Oh, right.
Sounded cool for our second album, which was a bit progressively minded and sold bugger all.
Yeah,
because of it. I mean, the young screamers didn't know what the hell we were doing. So that was basically the end of the band. So I just thought, well, if I'm going to go into prog, I might as well go all the way, because I had lots of ideas and I've been into all kinds of music all my life anyway. So me and the drummer and a bass player friend auditioned for singers, and we found a guy called Tim Staffel who'd not long left a band called Smile, who some people
went on to be Queen. Yeah,
they went on to be Queen. So Brian and Roger were in Smile. So I got to meet them, and Roger came to see my band very often, which is nice of him. And we couldn't think of a good name, so we just called ourselves
Morgan. And you were sci-fi, weren't you? Very kind of, is that right? Sort of the LPs,
yeah, I mean,
of Floyd and King Crimson. Yeah.
Yeah, look at that. I mean, it's spacey.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
The album cover was designed by Tim, and one side was a long concept track, 20-minute track, and I quite liked it. I was quite pleased. And we recorded in Italy. Italy was very big on prog.
Yes.
And
yes.
we got a really good deal with RCA in Italy, and we used the best studio in Europe at that time. It was a 16-track, which is rare for 1972, and brilliant studio where people like Nino Rota recorded music for Fellini films.
Yeah.
And so it had this huge warehouse full of amazing rare keyboards, which I grabbed and used on the album. It was a wonderful time to be recording in Italy.
But it was
fair to say, very well.
It's fair to say that wasn't a big commercial success.
It wasn't, no. And we did 2 albums, but that was it. And we're out on our rear. So, and I thought by this time I was already like jaded. I was 5 years in music. I was 23 and feeling jaded already.
Over the hill.
Over the hill, I know. And I thought, well, what can I do? I need money. So I just got a job driving a van for an off license. And it was quite nice, really. Because when you deliver drink, people are happy.
Right.
So happy to see you. So
yeah.
That's a nice job. But I kept my eye on the back pages of Melody Maker looking for possible jobs, because bands always advertise there. And finally, I saw one ad that said, name band with imminent American tour needs keyboard player. And I thought, oh, America. Haven't been there. Been all over Europe with the other bands. Never been to America. I'll go and see what it's all about. And I went down there, and it was in a little studio in Chelsea, and it was a sunny afternoon. And I got there early, and next to the studio was an off license. I thought, well, I fancy a quick drink before the audition. Why not? I've got time. And I went in there, and they had these little sachets of 1 glass portions of wine, which I've never seen since. I thought, that's ideal. I'll have that. And I thought, well, how do you drink a sachet? You're going to spill it all down your shirt. So I said to the guy, can you lend me a glass? And he said, yeah, sure. So I'm now drinking in an off license, illegally, with a glass of red wine. And I had 1 sip, and suddenly Overend Watts from Mott the Hoople, by this time I knew who they were, came in and said, oh, would you like to come down to the studio? So I just said, all right. And I wandered down with my wine glass and said...
One you prepared earlier. So they saw you as a kindred spirit, basically. That's good. But you joined the group where they'd done all the young dudes, and they were absolutely at the top of their game. When they said, what was that like going for these huge American tours?
Yeah, I mean, they were soon to release this one, because they'd actually had more than 1 hit.
Yeah.
And we were big. We were 5,000 to 10,000 people a night. And it was my introduction to America, the perfect introduction for a young man. The first gig, we had Joe Walsh and Barnstorm opening for us, who was a phenomenal band. That was his peak. He was doing Rocky Mountain Way and lots of other brilliant songs. I thought, my God, we've got to follow these guys. And we did, and it worked very well, because they were like raunchy American rock, and we were like hard-edged English rock. So good combination. Then the next gig, we had the New York Dolls opening for us, which was like, my God, what's this? And they were punk before punk. This was 1973. So I was getting a brilliant education, and it went on to other bands like Blue Oyster Cult, a little band called Aerosmith, and, you know, just all these amazing opening acts who all became huge.
What do you remember of the internal kind of dynamic of the group? You know, because it was Ian Hunter was there at the time, obviously, and Mick Ronson and Mick Ralphs.
Mick Ralphs, yeah.
Well, Mick Ralphs was there when I joined, and we actually shared a flat as soon as I joined. He invited me. And this guy kept coming around to play poker. Some swarthy-looking Newcastle fella by the name of Paul Rogers kept dropping in. I didn't know why. We just played poker and drank and had some fun. Little did I know that, I guess probably in Mick's bedroom, they were plotting bad company.
Yeah.
I hadn't a clue. And then suddenly, 6 months after I joined, Mick said, I'm leaving, see ya. And he went off to Bad Company and Glory. And we had 2 weeks to find somebody else. So we got Ariel Bender.
Oh, of course. Formerly Luther Grosvenor.
Grosvenor, yeah.
Yeah. So when did you leave Mott the Hoople?
Well, it was only 2 years, but it went by very quick, because then Ariel Bender left and we got Mick Ronson in, who was brilliant, and I was a huge fan, so I was very happy.
Yeah, Ronson was after that, wasn't he? Yeah.
And we did one European tour, and then there was all sorts of management problems, and Ian Hunter was very stressed out. In fact, he had some kind of nervous breakdown. And we were just on the verge of playing Madison Square Gardens and gigs like that. And Ian said, I'm out. Oh, right, okay.
Right.
So, and it was near Christmas as well. So it was a bit of a sad Christmas that year.
And you've been supported by Queen, hadn't you, at some stage, towards the end?
We had, yeah. I mean, that's when I met Queen again.
Wasn't that a big? Did that feel like a big threat? They were really on the way up, weren't they?
No, not at all, because they're very different to us. And, you know, they were still fairly new. They'd only been together about a year or so, I think. But they were trying very, very hard. In fact, that's what I thought when I watched them. I thought, oh, they're trying too hard. Come on. Because we were already established. We just swan on and do our thing. But they come on like this and do their thing. Trying too hard. You know, not my cup of tea. Well, trying too hard apparently pays off, doesn't it?
It works. It does.
So, you know.
Not a bad thing.
So they never supported anybody else ever again. They did 20 gigs with us in England and 20 in America. So we got to know them pretty closely.
Right.
And they were watching a number we did called Marionette, which is a sort of mini opera on our last album, The Hoople. And people say that that's where Freddie got the idea for Bohemian
Are you
Rhapsody.
Suggesting, yes, to our learned friends?
Yeah, I know.
They were a little light-fingered. And you finished up, you joined, you were a member of Queen on the, what, it was early 1982, was it? You toured with them as the keyboard player?
I did. Well, they were, because on their first 2 or 3 albums, they wrote no synthesizers were used on this album. Proudly, because people used to think Brian's guitar was a synthesizer. So they had to make that known. But then Freddie got into black music and got friendly with Michael Jackson and wanted to do more funky stuff. And started using some of the new synths for those funky bass lines. And so they started doing it on the albums, and they thought, well, we better get someone to do it on tour, because we can't do it. Because Freddie or Brian or Roger played the synth on the albums, and I got the job. So I was off on the road with Queen. The funniest thing that happened...
Was that the great kind of champagne bohemian kind of jamboree that we're led to believe it might have been?
No. I mean, the backstage was like a sort of nursery. There were kids everywhere. I swear every member of Queen, except Freddie, of course, had about 4 kids by then. And so it was very restrained backstage. But one thing I did enjoy was, well, it's a funny story. Brian May used to do this huge solo spot, a 20-minute guitar symphony on his own. And the rest of the lads would get off stage and let him get on with it. And playing big stadiums, you know, the dressing room is usually too far away to go to. So they had a little black tent in the wings. And you go in the tent, just room for the 4 of us. And there'd be a table of Dom Perignon and a table of white powder and whatever else he fancied, you know. And we just have a little break. And by the second week, we all realized that Brian's solo was exactly the same every night. There was no improvisation at all. This is basically the difference between Queen and Mott. Mott are messy and improvisation, but Queen are perfect, perfect, perfect every night. And Freddie suddenly realized it and looked at me and said, "Oh God, I'm so bored. Let's go shopping." Cracked me up.
Very good.
But it wasn't really rock and roll to me. I mean, it was a bit more like a Broadway show, you know.
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
Yeah.
sure.
Had to be perfect every night, you know.
Yeah.
I know I'm a more of a hoople, frankly. And by the way, people wonder where the name Mott the Hoople comes from. This is very quick. It came from a book, which you probably know, which Guy Stevens read when he was in prison. And he came out of prison and said, "I think it's a good name for your band." And we said, okay. Well, I wasn't there yet. But Mott the Hoople wasn't the origin. This was the origin of the name Hoople.
Oh, right.
Major
Hoople and his horse.
Okay.
I know, in this book is from 1935.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And it's in good nick, and it's tiny. It's a beautiful little book. I bought it on eBay. And it's just little cartoons about some wacky, eccentric bloke called Major Hoople.
I've never seen that before.
No.
I know, it's not many people know that, you know. So it started off as a newspaper, you know, column, and became a book. So
right.
this is
you made a record. Well, you made many records in your own right, but one of the first you did a project called Miniatures.
That's right. Well, once I'd left being in bands, you know, after Mott the Hoople, and then went through a couple of different bands with some of the members. Eventually, I realized that I'm not into big bands and big record companies. I wanted to go indie. I'd love the whole punk movement, the whole DIY thing. So I hooked up with a label called Cherry Red Records, who is still going, one of the longest running indies labels.
Yeah.
Got very, very friendly with them and did a couple of albums with them. And one day, the boss who runs it said to me, "You know what? Anything you create, we will release for you." And like, wow, you know, carte blanche. No control whatsoever. Do what you want. And I sat down and I wrote a list of people I'd like to collaborate with. I thought, well, next time I won't do it on my own like I have done. I'll invite various interesting musicians that I've been following. And the list got longer and longer and longer. And I couldn't decide. And suddenly I had a moment of lateral thinking. And I said to myself, well, why pick one? Invite them all. So the next question was, well, then how do you get all the like 50 musicians? You can't get them in the same room at the same time. It's not possible. So the next lateral thinking came and said, well, 50 musicians, you can just about squeeze 50 minutes on an LP. So give them 1 minute each and let them do what they want. And that turned into Miniatures.
Right.
And this is Robert Wyatt and Andy Partridge at XCC, isn't it? And all sorts of people, yeah.
Yeah, Robert Fripp, Neil Innes, Quentin Crisp, R.D. Lang, the psychiatrist, Michael Nyman, and Pete Seeger was a big influence on this. I didn't actually get Pete Seeger, but he'd made an album in 1957 called The Goofing Off Suite, which was kind of his miniatures. It was versions of classical music played on a solo banjo. A very lovely little album. And there was one track on there where he did Beethoven's Ninth on a banjo. And I thought, that's got to be the closing song. So I called up Folkways Records, who is with them. And Folkways Records is an amazing label, folk music and and pioneering labels, right? And I spoke to the actual boss, Moses Ash. And I said, you know, I'm doing this track. And he said, oh, well, what's the budget? And I said, well, we haven't got any budget really. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, just give me what you can and no royalties, just what can you give me? I said, what, $100? Done. And that was the end of our conversation. So I bought the right to that track for this album for $100. And I thought, this is how Folkways Records released 2,000 albums. Yeah. Because this guy doesn't mess around, does he? Done. So that's the closing track on the album. And there's a poster in there. I got all the artists to give a visual item to stick on the poster. So there's 50
Oh,
little
nice.
bits of art
Yeah.
things from each of the artists. And it went very well. It's a bit of a cult album now. There's been a few copycat albums. In fact, this year's the 40th anniversary of this album. And there's a guy in America who's making a sort of tribute to miniatures.
Very good.
That's great.
He's doing the same thing basically, and he's invited some of these artists to be on his album.
So you were telling me a story the other day about Tarantino involving a Japanese group. What was that? Tell us that again.
Well, you know, being a foreigner in Japan for as long as I am, and there's not that many English musicians here this long. The only one I can think of is the pianist in the Boomtown Rats, Johnny Fingers.
All right.
Oh, he lives in Japan. Okay.
He used to wear pajamas on stage.
Yeah.
He's the only English musician that I know has been here this long. So you get odd little offers of jobs and things. And so I went to a friend's birthday party, and I was playing, and there was this band playing called the 5, 6, 7, 8s.
Yes.
And they're brilliant. They're a 3-piece retro rock girl band.
Yeah.
Who, you know, the whole thing is 60s twangy guitars.
Kind of surf music, isn't it?
Yeah, and tight lame dresses and beehives, just brilliant, you know. And we jammed together that night, and I got very friendly with them. So, you know, we've played together quite often ever since, which is now why I'm wearing a number 9 T-shirt.
So you are number 9 in the 5, 6, 7, 8.
Oh, okay.
And I said, because of course their big claim to fame is that they appeared in Kill Bill. And that shot them to fame, and they've never come down from that, and they still tour everywhere. And I said, well, how did you get a job in Kill Bill? And they said, well, Tarantino was over in Japan location hunting. And at the end of his trip, just before going to the airport, he saw a nice shirt in a shop or something. So I must go and buy that quickly before I go to the airport. And he goes in the shop and he hears their music. And he loves it instantly. And so he says to the shop assistant, what's this music? And she said, oh, Japanese band, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8. Can I buy the CD? And they said, well, no, we're a clothing shop. We're not a CD shop. He said, no, you don't understand. I'm leaving the country now, and I must have this CD. So they said, oh, all right then. So he bought the CD and took it with him, and then got the band to come and play 2 songs in this club scene in Kill Bill.
Fantastic.
Which completely changed their entire career, yeah.
And
But you've been out in Japan a while, so you have a thing running called Morgan's Organ. Is that right? It's a series of concerts you've been doing?
Yeah, I do. It started off in 2003 when an English friend of mine opened a really nice club in Tokyo called Super Deluxe, and it became the sort of cutting-edge underground club for cool music. And I played there as soon as it opened. I said, I love this place. It's bigger than most Japanese places, which are like little black boxes. And I feel very comfortable here. Could I do a monthly solo gig here? And he said, absolutely, go ahead. So I started doing it, and I did it for free, partly because I was making good money out of TV ad music and film music, but partly I've been collecting vintage keyboards, and I like to play with them and experiment with them. And it's much more fun experimenting in front of an audience than doing it at home. So every month I would pick a selection of keyboards and have my roadie drag them down there and just jam. And I only needed about 20, 30 people, and that was enough to have a nice audience, because it was usually fairly ambient, quietish music. So just have the audience sitting there with a little meal and a glass, something. That was nice. And one thing that happened was, as it was quiet, I didn't like this noise that happened after every little piece of improvising. This noise that is called clapping, because it totally broke the atmosphere. So what I thought, what can you do about that? You can't tell them not to clap. That's not fair. So I just kept playing. So in other words, I'd finish an improvised piece naturally, but I'd have a looper or something going, or a little drum machine, and it would be ticking away. So it wasn't silent yet, nobody would clap, while I think of what I'm going to do next. So in the end, I started playing about 45-minute pieces straight through. 45 minutes, then a break, then another one. And I did this every month for 10 years. So by the end of that, it was coming up to number 100. And I said, I think I'm going to knock it on the head. Not because I don't like it, because it's just time for something new. So the manager said, okay, well, we'll announce it's the last gig. And 2 days before the gig, I called them as usual, saying, how many reservations have you got this time? It's usually 20. He said, oh, 250. I thought, bloody hell. Well, I can't sit and quietly doodle ambient style to 250 people standing, because they would have to be standing to pack them in. So I called a drummer immediately and said, right, let's do a bit more of a dynamic improvisation gig. So we did. And that was the last one. And then I moved into this house where I am now, which used to be a piano school. And the room I'm in, the music room, is soundproofed. And it's big enough to squeeze in about 30 or 40 people. So I do concerts here, which are now called Morgan's Organ at home.
What's that instrument behind you? Fantastic looking old, what is that, 60s, 70s keyboard?
It's actually invented in 1941. This one I think was made in 1950, as was I. And it's called an ondioline. It's a French synthesizer. And it started a fashion. Ondioline became pianoline, which became clavioline. And there's all these copycat instruments started popping up. And one of the most famous. Are we ending the show here? Because I'll
give us a tune. Come on, play us a tune.
All right. Well, this is one that was done on the clavioline, but this sounds very similar.
Oh dear.
Lost him. With a flourish.
Very good.
That's great.
Very good.
Fantastic.
Record made in the Holloway Road, wasn't it? I think it was.
Yeah, that's great.
Before he shot himself.
Yeah. Morgan, it's been delightful to talk to you, to catch up with you. Stay well, stay indoors. And I'm sure people are looking forward to you when Morgan's Organ is once more in full effect.
Nice to see your Mott the Hoople promotional pillow behind you. That's fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's bootlegged and illegal. So
there's a bootleg pillow.
A bootleg pillow.
Report them to the police, but someone gave me to.
That's great.
Yeah,
lovely to see you.
I'm going to put in a plug for this one. Lisa Ronson. Ever heard of Lisa Ronson? Mick Ronson's daughter.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
And I played on this album, and she's absolutely brilliant.
Great.
Okay.
She's dark and mysterious. So check her out, Lisa Ronson.
Very good.
Yay.
Good to see you. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.